Hi all, I thought I'd do a bit of post-mortem on that game. I thought I had a good position. It seems I did have a good position here. And I played knight f6 check, which has this idea of disrupting the opponent's king safety to try and switch a rook in. Not sure it matters which one, to try and switch a rook into the attack as well. And it's interesting actually that e takes d, because there's also this diagonal pointing at the king, so it seems to be close to winning. Now this also seems to carry out the same theme of disrupting, these two pawns. So it's interesting that knight h6 is the most crushing, much more crushing than knight f6 with 4.21. I'm just showing the first three actually strongest moves according to Houdini. Let's have a look at knight h6. So say he takes, I take, so I open up the diagonal. So the key thing here is, the difference is that I'm keeping the pawn clear, I'm keeping the diagonal clear, I'm not having a pawn on f6. So probably it makes a rook lift much more effective to coordinate with this bishop somewhere. So let's see, the queen moves to f7, rook f3. And now a desperate move like knight e5 was mentioned, or knight e7 losing the knight like that, attacking here. So if he gets in knight g6, it's not so hot. So I take on e7, takes on f3, and now I use g takes. So maybe it doesn't matter which rook. So now I guess the threat is now rook g3. So it's this diagonal and this file being used. So say rook takes e7. Now queen h6 removes the king's exit point, so there's a crossfire, an intersection of various attacking roads here, and this would have been the clinical kill. This would be how to play it, and it goes on. Okay, so queen d6. Let's just follow it a little bit more, and white ends up a lot better here. Okay, so the way I played it after f5 was knight f6, which isn't so bad either, apparently. Initially, it was going up there, and it's gone to 1.79. You see that shift. So what's happened here? E takes, he played queen f7. Okay, so the difference is between knight f6 and h6, I've got that pawn blocking my own bishop, but the pawn does offer an advantage in that it's got a hook for g7. If I switch a rook to play rook g7, which I thought was attractive. But the danger here is this shielding maneuver at the moment, which doesn't seem possible because of the pawn. But in the game, after this, the shielding maneuver, which is a key defensive resource, it becomes possible because I'm over optimistic about rook g7. In fact, I've already mucked up this position because the upside of the knight h6 line was the bishop diagonal was kept clear. So that was kind of the trump card of that variation compared to this variation. The trump card of this variation is the pawn is actually stopping knight e7 to g6, but that trump card is kind of removed because a rook g7 here is not crushing, and the pawn now on g7 is still blocking in that bishop on g7, but now this knight e7 to g6 has become possible, which is giving black, just showing that black's just a piece up. Black's actually technically winning, and he actually plays the accurate maneuver now, knight e7, which is logical anyway, and it stops all the threats. There's apparently no missed opportunity now for white that I missed. He's actually just much better. He missed the really crushing move knight f4, but knight e4 is also crushing. And this turns out, of course, to be the strongest move, bishop g2, and it's all gone. The attack's all been obliterated. So that was really interesting, I thought, because actually, how do we make this variation work? Well, apparently here, instead of rook g3, bishop takes f5 is a resource. It's amazing, these resources, these dynamic resources. So bishop takes f5 uses still the actual trump card of the pawn is actually these two squares for rook e7 to be dangerous. So say e takes f, and now rook e7 is the crunching move, so it's using that pawn on f6. I don't know if the computer's started hanging now, but what does black do here basically? if he takes check, then he'd have to give back a knight, because if the king goes over here, then we've opened up the diagonal as well. And so rook g3 is actually, that's like a mate now, forced mate. It's actually, well, taking their queen h8, it's all crushing. So actually this bishop takes f5 is amazing, but what's really amazing as well is if it's not taken, so say the bishop is targeted, now this important bishop on the diagonal, then apparently bishop takes e6, and even though I've got a weakened back row with my king here, there's an amazing idea of using the pawn for a back row mate on the opponent in this variation. After knight takes c3, obviously taking the queen is impossible, but just rook fe3. Amazing dynamism being shown up here. Okay, so what's going on here? If queen takes f6, then now bishop f5 for threatening mate and threatening the rook. So if takes, just take the rook and whatever. And if queen g7, rook e8. So this battery is really useful on e8. And otherwise, after this, black looks to be in trouble. Even if he countersacks the exchange, I'm now I can even take with the queen. In fact, taking the queen is the absolute strongest, leaving black temporarily material up, but the pawn is actually shown to be a trump card here because it's now helping for this rook e8 mating net. So this is why chess is so complex, that actually has to give back material to just being exchanged down there. So in fact, what I played, knight f6, turns out, although different to knight h6, not as crushing, it creates this other idea of using the pawn in multiple variations on f6. So, but you've got to like prove that the pawn's useful for this to be playable, and the proof comes in the form of bishop takes f5 here. So actually, he wriggled out here masterfully after rook f3. He started playing very good moves. So king h8, the absolute best move, to make sure that the pawn is not a hook on either g7 or e7. So you see this rook g8, and now the pawn's made useless, and it's sort of end of game now once this e7 to g6 maneuver happens. So that's kind of really, I think that's kind of really interesting. That I was kind of attracted to having the pawn on f6, but if we look back, it's better just to clear away the diagonal. It seems much simpler. Clear away the diagonal for the bishop, and then try and switch a rook to the g file, and black would still try and get this knight g6 in. So here rook g3, knight g6. I guess that's only a small advantage for white. Black's shielding basically, and there's no big problem. e5, and it starts to shield the diagonal. So really, even though this is discovering an attack against the rook, it turns out that this g file is still good with this diagonal, and this is still crushing. So amazing wealth of tactical ideas here from this position. I thought I'd show you. So I don't know how you would calculate this position. Let's turn off the engine here. About either knight f6 or h6, and think about the sort of trump cards of the variations. You know, the trump card of the knight f6 variation is the pawn on f6, but how would you like celebrate that trump card? You need to like then either use e7 or g7 as the hooks of the pawn, but the other one's just much clearer. But how do you use the g file? You've got to be prepared to even sacrifice the exchange on f3 to play g takes, to use the g file like that. So both have their intricacies, their advantages, which need careful play to exploit, but they're both kind of winning in this position. So I thought I'd share that with you. Comments or questions on YouTube? Thanks very much.